Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into something I know a lot of you are interested in preparing kids for the future.
It's such a big topic.
It really is. Now, of course, I don't have a crystal ball,
No.
and neither do you.
Nope.
But we do have some fascinating research
Yes.
that we're going to be looking at today.
Yeah.
It's got advice for kids, parents, and schools. So
That's right.
let's unpack this together and see what we find.
Yeah, what I think is so important to remember is that preparing for the future isn't about predicting specific events.
Right.
It's about giving kids the tools and the mindset
Yeah.
to thrive no matter what comes their way.
It's almost like giving them a compass instead of a map.
Yeah,
Because who knows what the terrain's going to look like in 10 years.
right.
But speaking of tools, the research that you sent over talks about this toolkit for the future.
Yes.
What kind of things are we putting in there?
Well, one of the most surprising things I found was this emphasis on unlearning and relearning.
Whoa, okay.
Unlearning.
That sounds a little counterintuitive.
It does, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like hitting the reset button,
Uh-huh.
but the source makes a really compelling point.
Yeah.
Think about how quickly knowledge about AI is evolving. What we know today
Right.
might be outdated in a couple of years.
Wow.
So that's why learning how to learn
Yeah.
is more important than just memorizing facts.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It's like teaching kids to be comfortable with the unknown.
Yeah,
And I guess that kind of ties into the whole digital literacy thing too, right?
absolutely.
Because technology is changing so fast.
Exactly. And it's not just about being able to use the latest gadgets.
Right.
The source talks about the importance of understanding how technology works
Okay.
on a deeper level.
Yeah.
Like, how does AI function?
Uh-huh.
What are the ethical implications of all this data that we're generating?
So we've got unlearning, we've got digital literacy. What else is in this toolkit?
Well, this one might not surprise you, but the source really emphasizes emotional intelligence, EQ.
I think we've all met people who are brilliant, but just can't seem to navigate
Yeah.
social situations. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
Exactly. It's about empathy, communication,
Yeah.
teamwork, all those things
Yeah.
that help us connect with others and manage our own emotions,
Right. Yeah.
especially when things get tough. The source makes this interesting point that in a world that's increasingly automated, these uniquely human skills
Right.
are going to become even more valuable.
Yeah, because robots can't do empathy.
Right.
At least not yet.
Not yet.
But along with EQ, the source also talks about critical thinking,
Yes.
which in the age of misinformation
absolutely crucial.
feels absolutely crucial.
Yeah, think about how much information
Yeah.
we are bombarded with every day.
Oh, it's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. Kids need that mental filter
Right.
to sift through it all and figure out what's true, what's
Mhm.
biased, and what's just plain fake.
It's like teaching them to be savvy detectives of the internet.
That's a good way to put it.
But with all this talk about skills and knowledge, I think it's easy to forget the huge role that parents play.
Right.
And I have to say, the source had some surprisingly specific and relatable advice for
Yes.
parents.
It does. It's not just vague platitudes. It actually gets into the nitty-gritty of how we can support our kids.
Okay, so hit me with some of these practical tips.
Well, one that really resonated with me was the idea of encouraging exploration.
Okay.
And I'm not just talking about letting kids try different sports or instruments.
Uh-huh.
It's about actively supporting hobbies that develop a diverse set of skills.
So, like, if my kid is obsessed with building robots in the basement,
Yes.
I should be cheering them on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ah.
The source specifically mentioned robotics
Okay.
as a great example because it develops problem solving,
Right,
logical thinking, even teamwork.
right.
But then they also talk about creative writing,
Okay.
which on the surface seems completely different.
Right.
But both of those hobbies tap into different parts of the brain.
Yeah, it's like a secret recipe for a well-rounded skill set.
Exactly. Robotics gives you that STEM foundation,
Hmm.
while creative writing fosters imagination, communication, self-expression.
Right.
It's about finding that balance.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Okay.
What is one piece of advice from the source that you as a parent
Mm.
would want to put into practice?
That's a tough one. There's so much good stuff in here. But I think the one that really stands out is the idea of modeling lifelong learning ourselves.
Oh, I love that. It's like that saying, don't just tell your kids to read, show them that you read.
Exactly. Because kids are always watching us, right?
Yeah.
So if we're constantly complaining about learning new things or being stuck in our ways, they're going to pick up on that.
So it's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Yes.
And that can be as simple as picking up a new hobby, trying a new recipe, or even just admitting when we don't know something.
Yes.
And being open to learning from our kids.
Absolutely. It's about showing them that learning is a lifelong adventure, not a chore.
Speaking of things that can feel like chores, the source also touches on the dreaded screen time debate.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
Yeah.
And I was pleasantly surprised by how they approach it. It wasn't about demonizing technology
Right.
or setting rigid limits. It was more about finding a healthy balance.
Because, let's face it, screens are part of our world, and they're not going away.
Right. And they can be amazing tools for learning creativity and connecting with others.
Right.
But it's about being mindful
Yeah.
of how and when they're used.
Uh-huh.
So instead of saying, no screens after dinner,
Right.
maybe it's about having family game night once a week, or encouraging kids to use technology to create something like a video or a piece of music.
I like that. It's about being intentional with our tech use.
Yes.
Both as adults and as kids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a skill that will serve them well no matter what the future holds.
Yeah, okay. So we've talked about giving kids this amazing toolkit for the future with unlearning and relearning digital literacy, EQ, and critical thinking. And we've talked about how parents can model lifelong learning and find that healthy balance with technology. But there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't discussed yet, the role of schools. And I have to say, the source has some pretty radical ideas about how education needs to evolve.
It definitely challenges the traditional model that many of us grew up with.
All right, well, let's dive into that in part 2.
Welcome back. You know, it's fascinating to think about how the traditional model of education, with its emphasis on memorization and standardized tests, it's really struggling to keep up with the rapid pace of change in the world.
It's like we're trying to prepare kids for a destination that keeps moving.
Exactly.
Right, but the source that we're looking at today argues that it's not just about, specific skills or knowledge.
Right.
It's about cultivating certain mindsets
Yes.
that will help kids thrive no matter what the future throws at them.
Absolutely. Things like adaptability, resilience, and a growth mindset.
Yeah.
That belief that you can always learn and improve.
Okay, those sound great in theory, but how do we actually nurture those qualities in kids?
Well, the source talks about the importance of creating a supportive and inclusive environment in schools
Okay.
where kids feel valued and empowered to take risks.
So it's not just about academics.
Right.
It's about creating a space where kids feel safe to experiment, to fail, to learn from their mistakes.
Exactly. And that actually ties into another important point, that the source raises the need for mental health education and resources in schools.
That's something we're hearing more and more about these days.
Yes.
And for good reason. Think about all the pressure kids are facing today, from social media to academic competition to just the uncertainty of the future.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to handle.
And the source argues that we need to go beyond just addressing mental health challenges when they arise.
Yeah.
It's about proactively building resilience and coping skills.
It's like giving them a mental health toolkit, just like we talked about giving them a future-proof toolkit for skills and knowledge.
Exactly.
And I imagine those toolkits are pretty interconnected.
Absolutely. When kids feel good about themselves and have healthy coping mechanisms, they're more likely to be engaged in learning to take on challenges and to bounce back from setbacks.
So it's all part of a holistic approach to education, recognizing that children are not just brains in jars. They're whole beings
Yes.
with emotional and social needs.
Exactly. And, while we've been focusing on what kids need to learn, I think it's important to acknowledge that adults are navigating this rapidly changing world too.
Right.
And the source actually has some valuable insights for us grown-ups as well.
Ooh, I like where this is going. So what can we as parents, educators, or just lifelong learners ourselves take away from this research?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways for adults is the importance of embracing lifelong learning ourselves.
Yeah.
We can't expect our kids to be curious and adaptable if we're not modeling those qualities in our own lives.
Right. It goes back to that whole walking the walk thing.
Exactly.
So let's say I haven't picked up a new skill or hobby in a while. Where do I even begin?
It doesn't have to be anything dramatic. It could be as simple as reading a book outside of your usual genre, taking an online course, or even just having a conversation with someone who has a different perspective than your own.
I love that. It's about staying curious, being open to new experiences, and showing our kids that learning is a lifelong adventure, not something that ends when you graduate from school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, speaking of school, one of the most thought-provoking parts of the source was its focus on preparing kids for future careers.
Right.
especially in those emerging fields like AI, renewable energy, and health tech.
Right. Those are the areas where we're seeing so much innovation and growth, but they're also changing so rapidly. It's hard to even imagine what those jobs will look like 10 years from now.
Exactly. So how do we prepare kids for jobs that might not even exist yet?
Right.
Well, the source emphasizes that it's not just about technical skills. It's about fostering creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving. Those transferable skills that can be applied to any field.
So it's like giving them a mental agility workout so they're ready to adapt to whatever challenges come their way.
Yeah.
I like that analogy. But, as we talk about all these practical skills and knowledge, I think it's also important to remember the importance of values and ethics,
No, absolutely.
especially in a world where technology is advancing so quickly.
That's a crucial point. And the source really hits home on this. It's about equipping kids with a strong moral compass to navigate the ethical dilemmas that will inevitably arise as technology continues to evolve.
Because technology is just a tool, right? It can be used for good or for bad.
Exactly. And we need to help kids understand the implications of their actions in the digital world. Like the source mentions the ethical use of technology and the importance of being aware of our digital footprint. These are things that weren't even on our radar a generation ago.
It's like teaching them digital citizenship, the rights and responsibilities that come with being a part of the online world. And that goes hand in hand with critical thinking because they need to be able to evaluate information, recognize bias, and make informed decisions.
Absolutely. In a world awash with information, being able to discern truth from falsehood, to think critically and independently, is more important than ever.
It's like giving them that mental filter we talked about earlier. But this time, it's not just about filtering out misinformation. It's about filtering out unethical behavior and making choices that align with their values.
I love that. It's about raising kids who are not just smart and successful, but who are also ethical, responsible, and compassionate members of society.
So it's not just about preparing them for the future. It's about preparing them to be good humans.
Exactly. And that brings us back to that idea of equipping kids with a holistic toolkit,
Yes.
one that includes practical skills, knowledge, and values, but also a strong sense of self-awareness, empathy, and resilience.
It's a lot to think about. But I think what's so exciting is that this isn't just about kids. It's about all of us learning and growing together.
Absolutely. It's a shared responsibility involving parents, educators, and the wider community.
It really does take a village.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think we're ready to wrap things up and share some final thoughts in part 3. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been on quite a journey today, unpacking this idea of preparing kids for the future.
It really has been fascinating. We've talked about everything from unlearning and relearning to digital citizenship to the importance of modeling lifelong learning ourselves.
And through it all, one theme just keeps coming up, this idea of adaptability.
Right. I mean, the world is changing so fast.
Yeah.
And that ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn
Yeah.
is going to be so crucial for kids and adults.
It's like we're all on this continuous learning curve.
Yeah.
And that can feel kind of daunting sometimes,
Right.
but it can also be pretty exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, think about all the possibilities that open up when we embrace that growth mindset and that willingness to step outside of our comfort zones.
It's funny. We've talked about all the amazing things that we can do to equip kids for the future. But I kind of want to flip the script for a moment. If you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, one skill or piece of knowledge that would have helped you navigate the world as it is today, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I think for me, it would be to embrace failure as a learning opportunity.
Mm.
Growing up, I was so afraid of making mistakes
Right.
that I often held myself back.
I think a lot of us can relate to that. We're
Yeah.
kind of taught to strive for perfection.
Yes,
But sometimes that fear of failure can really hold us back.
exactly.
Mhm.
And looking back, some of my greatest learning experiences came from those moments where I stumbled or I fell short.
Yeah.
If I could go back, I would tell my younger self to be bold, to experiment, and to not be afraid to fail.
Because it's in those moments of vulnerability that we truly discover what we're capable of.
Exactly.
So if you're listening and you're ever feeling hesitant to try something new, just remember that failure is just part of the process.
It is.
It's part of the learning process.
Yeah.
And it really ties into everything we've been talking about today. It's not about having all the answers. It's about equipping ourselves and our children with the tools and the mindsets to navigate whatever comes our way.
It's about fostering that love of learning, that willingness to adapt, and that belief in our own ability to grow and evolve.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. We hope this exploration has given you some food for thought and maybe even inspired you to take action.
Remember, the future is not something that just happens to us. It's something we create.
Yeah.
And by empowering ourselves and our children